Hello and welcome to Trialogue's presentation aimed at providing South African businesses with a brief introduction to the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or the TCFD. Over the course of the next few minutes, we'll be taking you through an overview of international trends in sustainability, including the relevance of these developments to South African businesses, while also presenting the basics of the TCFD as a tool for identifying and addressing climate-related risks and opportunities, and touching on areas where Trialogue can provide support in your business's transition journey. The rapidly evolving world of sustainability, filled with its many frameworks, initiatives, associations, organizations, programs, and acronyms, begs many questions for those interested in understanding the state of play. Principally, what is actually going on? In essence, the world as we know it is in transition. As recently as August 2021, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, released a report declaring that climate change is unequivocally the result of human action and that we cannot avoid the most severe negative impacts until emissions cease entirely. COP26, the International Climate Conference, represented a watershed moment for the drive toward the minimization of emissions, as it was the first time that the private sector, particularly finance, had been so meaningfully included in the discussion, in fact being challenged to lead. And it's also the point at which national governments announced significant increases in ambition regarding targets for emissions reduction. The conference laid out a clear way forward for business, with net zero as the stated operating principle, and it set the stage for the new normal in business competitiveness, as driven by the ability to effectively and innovatively integrate climate-related risk and opportunity into strategy and operations. In the face of the unrelenting impacts of planet-wide climate change, a global shift is underway from systems of production and consumption based on exploitation and extraction toward those founded on the concepts of sustainable and inclusive growth and development. This shift reflects an evolution in thinking by policymakers and regulators, industry, and society, acknowledging that the current situation is not sustainable and that change is imperative. Taken together, these factors make clear that the transition is inevitable, and no one is immune to the implications. A major part of the transition involves tackling and moving beyond our current carbon-dependent system to a low-carbon economy. Addressing climate-related risks is key to achieving this. The role of the private sector, particularly financial services, is paramount. Increasing recognition of the role of business both in creating the problem and in providing solutions to climate change is reflected in growing intervention in market functioning, as well as an increasing emphasis on individual company commitments. Increasing policy intervention in this regard is inevitable and is increasingly disruptive, reflecting the understanding of governments of the important role of efficient capital market functioning in addressing the climate emergency. The increasing prominence of policy and regulatory intervention also highlights the overarching international prioritization of environmental and associated socioeconomic stability. In addition to top-down pressure from governments, businesses face bottom-up pressure to be more transparent, accountable, and sustainable in the form of increasing consumer demands. In the digital age, everyday consumers and savers are increasingly exposed to information regarding the impact of theirs and their service providers' actions on their experience of the world in which they live, and they're becoming increasingly vocal regarding their expectations of business when it comes to responsible practices. Even in the absence of external pressure, businesses would arguably still be shifting toward more sustainable practices, for the simple reason that this has been shown to be financially prudent. The evidence has shown, recently and consistently, that companies which effectively integrate material, environmental, social, and governance factors into their business strategies tend to outperform those that don't. This evidence has put to rest the debate around any trade-off between responsible business and financial return. From an investment perspective, the fact that more sustainable business operations are associated with higher returns means that neglecting to take ESG considerations into account in investment decisions is in fact a violation of fiduciary duty. This realization is driving significant shifts in focus of especially institutional investors who are required by law to assess climate-related risks as part of their due diligence processes. This expectation extends beyond institutional investors, though, with a recent guidance note from the King Committee highlighting the responsibilities of company directors with respect to delivering appropriate responses to the climate emergency. So what does all of this mean for business in practice? Well, given this context, countries and companies find themselves under tremendous pressure to make increasingly ambitious commitments to decreasing their emissions and improving their impact on society. In this regard, net zero commitments are considered to be a game changer. In general, and with specific reference to carbon-intensive industries, achieving net zero is not possible without significant alterations to business functioning, which requires intervention at a truly immense scale. Recognition of the magnitude of the commitment has seen net zero announcements come under substantial criticism, largely because these commitments or targets are meaningless in the absence of appropriate strategies for their attainment. As such, as tempting and necessary as they may be, these commitments are not to be entered into lightly. At this stage, one might be tempted to argue that this seems less relevant to, or at least less prevalent amongst African and especially South African businesses. And in this case, you may be surprised to learn that these trends are not only equally, but especially relevant in the African context. In fact, Africa is particularly vulnerable to the negative impacts of climate change. Estimates find that Africa's adaptation costs by 2050 could rise to $50 billion per year under a scenario where global warming is kept below 2 degrees Celsius. This cost would increase to $100 billion per year if we remain on a path toward global warming of 4 degrees Celsius. What this shows is that climate change is in every way a material and a pressing concern for businesses on the continent. Far from being an exception to this rule, South Africa is in fact viewed as holding a particularly important position in the African climate response. As a leading economy on the continent and home to two of the largest emitters globally, the world is watching South Africa to see how we adapt to the new normal. The country has now set a net zero by 2050 target, produced a sustainable finance strategy and a green finance taxonomy, and the presidency has appointed a special advisory committee on climate to ensure that national strategies are appropriately ambitious and coordinated. The South African National Treasury has also recommended that financial institutions in the country be required to increase the capacity of their leadership in terms of climate change and sustainability, and that corporate disclosure requirements be aligned to the recommendations of the TCFD. So what exactly is the TCFD and why should you care? TCFD, or the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, was created by the Financial Stability Board, an international economic body. The term TCFD is commonly used to refer to the set of recommendations provided by the task force, which is a popular ESG disclosure framework focused on climate. In 2019, nearly 60% of the world's 100 largest public companies supported the TCFD, reported in line with the TCFD recommendations, or both. Other ESG groups and frameworks, including the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, the International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the CDSB, have incorporated TCFD's recommendations as part of an effort to develop a universal framework using the best elements of previously developed frameworks. The TCFD framework is a useful tool for identifying, analyzing, and communicating your understanding of the materiality of climate-related factors to your business. Essentially, the TCFD framework provides a set of recommendations across 4 thematic areas. Importantly, TCFD is not a reporting framework, but rather a business strategy development and communication tool. Equally crucial to note is that it is not a once-off exercise, but a commitment to continuous learning and improvement. TCFD is likely to be mandatory in South Africa within the next 2 years. The South African National Treasury, as part of the Sustainable Finance Initiative, has established a working group focused on disclosure as per the TCFD. This is aligned to South Africa's commitments associated with our role within the G7 and G20, our adoption of the Paris Agreement, and also the South African Reserve Bank's commitments to the Network for Greening the Financial System. The evidence is in. Climate-related risks are pertinent to business operations. Directors are expected to adequately identify, assess, and address these risks. Failing this, significant ramifications are likely, not just from regulatory penalty, but through punishment by the market. Alignment with the TCFD requirements presents an opportunity for meeting increasingly robust regulatory requirements, increased awareness and therefore better risk management, easier or better access to capital by increasing investor and lender confidence, enhanced responses to existing disclosure requirements, more informed strategic planning, reduced climate-related information requests from investors, improved credibility and strengthened reputation, and for developing expertise in climate-related risk analysis. Admittedly, this can all seem overwhelming, especially if this is the first you're hearing of any of this. At Trialogue, we're committed to supporting South African businesses in fulfilling their responsibilities to society and the environment in a way that makes sense, to ensure that strategies are pragmatic and in themselves sustainable. As your partner in your transition journey, Trialogue applies extensive experience and expertise in integrated thinking and reporting and sustainability advisory to empowering your organization to initiate, embed, and communicate your ambitions and achievements with respect to climate-smart business. Our approach is to meet you where you are and to work with you to navigate the ever-evolving expectations of responsible business, with the ultimate objective of ensuring that your organization not only survives this transition, but is set to thrive on the other side. We hope that you found this presentation helpful in building your understanding of current trends in sustainability and introducing you to the concept of TCFD. We encourage you to continue to engage with the topic, either independently or by contacting us via our website to find out more about how Trialogue can support your transition journey.